One of the people that I've been thinking a lot about this past week is a frail, homeless, middle-aged black woman named Jean. Many years ago, in my previous life at Grace Church in Manhattan, Jean would knock day or night on the big wooden carved door of the church office where I was often stationed. We all know that being homeless on the street is dangerous, and it is doubly so for women. Tattered clothes hung over Jean's thin frame, and the shoes that she had probably gleaned from a nearby shelter clearly did not fit her swollen feet. Sometimes she would come to the door with a big bloody knot on her forehead. Somehow, Jean, who was clearly plagued with the disease of schizophrenia, had a sense that the church was a safe place for her, a place of respite. So I would open the big door and Jean would be standing there, and she would flash her outrageously beautiful smile, and she would start rambling a long, fanciful tale from her significantly confused mind. Now, pretty soon after getting to know Jean a little better, I learned to interrupt her long rush of words and try to find something for her to eat, anything, because each time she came, which was less and less frequently, she was more and more gaunt with hunger. Even so, there were only a few times that I could round up a plate of something to eat quickly enough before Jean, plagued with profound agitation, would take off once again into the dark. This is what I remember about Jean. On those few occasions when I actually could put a plate of leftovers in front of her, she would look down and she would take a long time for an elaborate grace. I wish I could describe her prayers to you. I wish I had a recording, because I will never, ever be able to convey how beautiful her grace was. Her prayers went on and on. Surely the food was getting cold, but no matter. These prayers came from a heart of gold, and they would reach the heavens with her heart-rending gratitude for the feast that was set before her. So then Jean would eat a few bites, and then, before she would leave, much to my dismay, she would reach into her coin purse, which indeed only had coins, and she would search diligently for her quarters. No matter how hard I tried to deflect her gift, she always wanted to leave a donation for the church, for the help of those that she deemed so much worse off than herself. Just saying, how convenient, what a coincidence. This just happens to be Stewardship Sunday. And here we are talking about a widow who reaches into her pocket and finds 2 tiny coins. Mind you, these coins called mites, they were so useless, so thin, that they couldn't even get a little carving onto it. Indeed, they were worth less than a penny. And this is all this widow has. And she puts it into the big brass basin as an offering to God. Many preachers would go for this. They would say, well, isn't her generosity a good model for all of us? Being that it's true confession time, I'm going to be honest enough to say when push comes to shove, actually I don't plan to sell everything, to change it into a big check, and donate it to the church. Not yet, anyway. God's still working on me. Actually, if any of you were planning to do so anytime soon, I would reluctantly have to suggest that it's not a good idea, and I would try to argue you out of it. Now, don't get me wrong, our treasurer, Chuck Schmitz, who is here this morning, he would definitely love and encourage everyone here to absolutely give, even give more generously this coming year. And I would too. But not just because we desperately need a balanced budget. I think that in itself would be an unconvincing reason. If we can't do any better than just balancing our budget, we should give what we have probably to Red Cross or Mercy Corps. They too are doing good and marvelous things, but of a different sort. Okay, now back to the gospel. My hunch is this, that Jesus actually wasn't using this poor widow as an object lesson for stewardship, nor is his main point the comparisons between her offering and those of the more well-to-do parishioners. What if, now I want you to think about this, what if the heart of this story rather centers on this simple but notable fact that Jesus notices that poor widow? Preacher David Luce notes that Mark records Jesus's watching the crowd putting the money into the treasury, and that moreover many rich people were putting in large sums. Yet, despite that fact, she's just one in the crowd, Jesus' attention is given to, even fixed on, the much smaller, if not paltry, offering of this woman. Perhaps Luce says, our first lesson today as well is simply to notice her, to see her, to acknowledge her being, her plight, her offering. She's not in the end an object lesson, but a person, easily unseen, even invisible, and yet worthy of Jesus' attention and ours. So perhaps one way to name why it is important to support this particular church with a generous pledge is this. By hanging around Jesus, Jesus literally softens our heart. Hanging around Jesus makes us bigger. Being part of the Jesus movement, we don't just learn how to be generous, but we become radiant with the spirit of generosity and gratitude. We are transformed by the love of God each week, that same God that loves us first. We lean into the one who, like the widow, Jesus notices. Jesus was indeed willing to follow her example and gave everything, even his life. So Adam and I have found that being generous to the church, this church that we love, has taught us how to be more joyful. We've learned this from you, from generous people who we have the privilege to know and to serve. Generosity teaches us to know even more deeply where our blessings come from. It also opens our eyes to who we are not inclined to see as we go about our daily lives. Because of Jesus, we have to ponder who we have forgotten, ignored, or overlooked, that God might be inviting us to notice, to recognize, to honor, and to serve. Maybe as the tired, tattooed teen flipping hamburgers at Zips. Perhaps as the traumatized stranger from California that no longer has a home. What about the lonely oldster confined to a wheelchair and with a failing mind? Similarly, being a part of this Christian community of the resurrection challenges us each week to a new level of humanity, a humanity made in the image of God. It really does. So Luce continues, he says, who have we made into an issue or a cause when first and foremost they are people? Champion the poor is one thing, but knowing the name and taking the time to care about a specific person who has very little is another thing altogether. Moreover, we might remind ourselves that each of us, no matter what our status or wealth, have days, sometimes many days, where we feel invisible, unremarkable, not worthy of attention. And yet Jesus, who sees us, deems us worthy of God's attention and frees us to give the same compassionate regard to others. So as mentioned earlier, of course, we are aware of celebrating this 100th anniversary since Armistice Day, an end to an unimaginable slaughter in Europe, a slaughter that involved many Americans, but many others as well. Also deeply implicated in ongoing issues of war and peace, this past week was the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, when the Nazi persecution of their Jewish neighbors began in deadly earnest. The struggle against the Nazis also called for sacrifice on the part of all Americans, as well as so many others. Clearly, the problem was not that the Nazis didn't notice the Jews living around them, but rather they chose not to see them as genuine persons deserving love and respect, as kin in the larger human family, let alone as kindred children of God. Indeed, they saw them as opponents to be feared. When we do not notice people, we are apt to forget about or ignore them. That is a sin and a shame. When we do not see others as human because we have been taught to fear or despise them, we are likely to treat them inhumanely, which is a sin and a shame and a crime, as we have seen played out all too frequently, even today. Indeed, this penchant not simply to ignore others, but to view them as fearful, even subhuman, seems increasingly prevalent and tragically condoned. The migrant caravan, persons who have been incarcerated, those trapped in poverty, persons of a different ethnicity or religion. Jesus sees them, just as Jesus saw that widow, and just as he sees us. They too are part of our family. We pledge allegiance to be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That is perhaps both the command and the promise, the law and the gospel, the grace and the peace that Jesus offers us today. So back to Stewardship Sunday. Someone once said, we must be saved together. We cannot go to God alone, else God would ask, well, where are the others? We need each other, and we need God. Every week, we need to be here together in this church. We too come together to learn how to say grace before we consume even a bite of food, just like my beloved Saint Jean. Surely she is already praying for us a full measure of grace and presence that is hard to match.